Hell's Angel found a little girl wandering barefoot at 3 a.m. Then he saw the padlock still hanging from her wrist. The garage light buzzed above him as Tank Malone wiped the last of the grease off his hands with a rag that had seen better days. It was 2:45 in the morning, and the only sound in the place was the hum of the old fluorescent light and the tick of the engine cooling on the lift behind him. He rolled his shoulders, feeling the ache settle into his back the way it always did after a long job. The rush job had been for Old Man Pruitt, whose delivery truck had thrown a belt just before a big produce run. Pruitt had called him near midnight, voice shaking with worry, and Tank hadn't even thought twice. He never did, not for Pruitt. The man had brought him a casserole every Sunday for 2 years after Tank's divorce, back when Tank could barely stand to cook for himself. You didn't forget things like that. You paid them back with grease under your nails at 3 in the morning if that's what it took. He tossed the rag onto the workbench and looked around the shop. Tools hung neat on their pegboard hooks. The concrete floor, swept clean at the end of every night, no matter how tired he was. It wasn't much, just 4 bays and an office with a busted air conditioner, but it was his. He'd built it up from nothing, one wrench at a time, after years of a life that had nearly buried him before he turned 30. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Tank clicked off the shop lights and stepped out into the cool night air, locking the door behind him with the same brass key he'd used for 15 years. His motorcycle sat waiting under the single street lamp, chrome catching the dim orange glow. He ran a hand along the seat before swinging his leg over it, an old habit, like greeting an old friend. Settling onto the bike, he let out a breath. 45 years old. Some nights that number still surprised him, like it belonged to someone else. He remembered being 20, wild and angry, riding these same roads too fast, looking for something to burn off the rage that lived in his chest back then. He'd been a mean drunk in those days, quick to throw a fist, slow to trust anybody who wore a badge or carried a clipboard. The system had taught him that lesson early. Back when he was a kid, nobody wanted. Bounced from one foster house to another until he aged out with nothing but a duffel bag and a chip on his shoulder the size of Texas. Things were different now. The club had changed too, softened with age the way a lot of tough men do once their knees start aching and their kids start calling them grandpa. Most of the brothers ran their own businesses these days, worked steady jobs, showed up to church potlucks with their wives. Tank sometimes caught himself smiling at how far they'd all come, a bunch of outlaws turned into a bunch of tired old family men. He turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life beneath him, low and familiar as a heartbeat. He liked riding this late, when the roads were empty and the world felt like it belonged only to him. It gave him time to think, or better yet, time not to think at all. Just the wind, the hum of the engine, and the stars scattered thin across the black sky. He pulled out of the lot and onto the main road, taking the long way home like he always did, cutting through the quiet stretch of farmland that separated town from his little house on the edge of the county. The fields on either side were dark and still, corn stalks swaying faint in the breeze, not a single light on for miles. His headlight cut a narrow path through the darkness, sweeping over gravel and weeds and the faded yellow line down the center of the road. He was thinking about his bed, about how good it would feel to finally lie down, when the beam caught something that made his whole body go rigid. A small shape stood in the middle of the road, pale and trembling, barefoot, wearing a torn nightgown that hung loose around her thin frame. Tank's hands moved on instinct, slamming the brakes hard enough to make the tires shriek against the asphalt. The bike skidded to a stop several feet away from her, gravel spraying out beneath him. He sat frozen, engine idling, staring at the girl standing motionless in his headlight, unable to make a single sound. Tank cut the engine. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise had been. He swung his leg off the bike slow, like sudden movement might shatter the girl standing there in the road. His boots hit the gravel soft, careful, the way he'd learned to walk around spooked animals and spooked people both. "Hey there," he said, keeping his voice low and even. "Hey, it's okay." She didn't run. She didn't even flinch at the sound of his voice. She just stood there, swaying a little on her feet like she might tip over any second. Her arms hung limp at her sides. Her bare feet were dirty, scraped up from the road, and Tank's chest tightened at the sight of it. A kid, out here, alone, in the middle of nowhere at 3 a.m. He took one step closer, then stopped. Let her get used to him being there. "My name's Tank," he said. "I'm not gonna hurt you. You hear me? I'm not gonna hurt you." The girl's eyes were open, but they didn't seem to be looking at anything. Not really. They were glassy far away, like she was somewhere else in her head, somewhere she'd gone to escape whatever had happened to her. Tank had seen that look before, a long time ago, in the mirror of a group home bathroom when he was maybe 8 years old. He knew that look meant a person had been hurt so bad, so many times, that they'd stopped expecting anything different. He crouched down low, dropping himself to her level, trying to make himself smaller, less like a big man on a loud motorcycle at the darkest part of the night. His knees popped when he bent them, and even that small sound made her flinch. "Easy," he whispered. "Easy now. I ain't gonna come any closer unless you want me to." Her whole body trembled, and now that he was closer, Tank could see it wasn't just fear making her shake. She was freezing. The night air had turned cold hours ago, and all she had on was that thin, torn nightgown. No shoes, no jacket, nothing to keep the chill off her skin. Her lips had a bluish tinge to them. Her arms were covered in goose flesh. "You're cold," he said, more to himself than to her. He started to reach for the zipper of his leather vest, thinking he'd wrap her up in it, get some warmth into her before anything else. But the second his hand moved toward the vest, she jerked backward, stumbling, nearly falling into the ditch at the side of the road. A small sound escaped her throat, something between a gasp and a whimper. Tank froze completely, hand still hanging in the air. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not gonna touch you." "Look, see, I stopped." He held both hands up, palms out, showing her he meant no harm, and stayed exactly where he was, crouched low in the gravel, letting her decide when it was safe to breathe again. That's when he saw it. Dangling from her thin wrist was a short length of chain, rusted and broken, and clipped to the end of it, a padlock, snapped clean through the shackle. The skin around her wrist was raw and red, rubbed nearly to blistering, like she'd twisted and pulled against that chain more times than anyone could count. Tank's stomach dropped. His jaw tightened so hard it ached. But he didn't move. He didn't let the fury rising in his chest show on his face. Not now. Not in front of her. He kept his hands up, kept his voice soft, forced himself to stay still even as everything inside him wanted to reach out and pull her into something warm and safe. Her eyes, which had been fixed somewhere past him, somewhere far off, finally seemed to land on something. Tank realized she was staring at his vest, at the small patch stitched over his heart, the angel with its wings spread wide. Faded some from years of sun and rain and rides just like this one. Something in her shifted. Her trembling didn't stop, not completely, but the wildness in her eyes softened just slightly. The pulling away eased. She stood there, staring at that little angel patch like it was the first familiar thing she'd seen in a very long time, and for the first time since he'd stopped the bike. She didn't look like she wanted to run. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Tank asked, still crouched low, still keeping his hands where she could see them. "Can you tell me your name?" The girl said nothing. Her eyes stayed locked on his, wide and hollow, like two dark windows with nobody home behind them. "That's okay," Tank said, when the silence stretched on. "You don't gotta tell me right now. No rush." He shifted his weight, careful not to make any sudden movement, and tried again. "Where do you live? Is your house close by? Your mama and daddy? They around here somewhere?" Still nothing. Not a word, not a nod, not a shake of her head. Just that same blank stare, like the questions were sounds from very far away, sounds that didn't have any meaning to her anymore. Tank had dealt with plenty of hard men in his life. Bikers who'd done time. Men who'd seen war and came home wearing the weight of it in their eyes. He knew what silence looked like when someone had nothing left to say, when talking had stopped being safe a long time ago. This girl's silence was that kind. The kind that got trained into a person, beaten into them, until quiet became the only way to survive. He glanced down at her wrist again, at the broken padlock and the raw red skin underneath it, and felt his throat tighten. "Okay," he said softly, mostly to himself. "Okay, we're gonna figure this out." He thought about the police station in town, maybe 15 minutes away if he pushed the bike hard. He thought about walking through those doors with a barefoot little girl in a torn nightgown, handing her over to strangers behind a desk, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, more strangers asking more questions she couldn't answer. He thought about how scared she already was of him, a man she'd never met, and how much worse that fear might get surrounded by badges and uniforms and cold plastic chairs. She was shaking harder now. Her teeth had started to chatter, tiny clicks in the quiet night air. Whatever fear had kept her frozen this long, her body was losing the fight against the cold. Tank didn't have time to figure out the right answer. He just had to do something. "All right," he said, standing up slow, unzipping his leather vest and pulling his arms free from it. "I'm gonna give you my jacket now. I'm gonna come a little closer to do it, but I promise, I'm just putting it around your shoulders. That's all." Okay, he didn't wait for permission this time, not really, but he moved slow enough that she could still bolt if she wanted to. She didn't. She stood there, swaying, watching him with those same hollow eyes, and when he draped the heavy leather jacket around her thin shoulders, she didn't flinch away. The jacket swallowed her whole. It hung past her knees, heavy with the smell of motor oil and road dust and years of wear, but the second it settled over her, something in her posture changed. Her shoulders dropped, just slightly. The shaking eased, just a little. Maybe it was the warmth. Maybe it was the angel patch, close enough now that she could reach out and touch it if she wanted. Tank crouched again, pulling the collar closer around her neck. "There," he said. "Better?" She didn't answer. But she didn't pull away either. He looked down the empty road, in both directions, dark and silent, no headlights anywhere in sight. Whatever had happened to her, whoever had put that chain around her wrist, they weren't coming to find her right now. Not with the sun still hours from rising. "I know a place," Tonk said, more to himself than to her. "Some people there who'll know what to do. Good people. They'll keep you warm, get some food in you. Nobody's gonna hurt you there. I promise you that." He straightened up and walked to his bike, swinging his leg over the seat, settling into the worn leather. Then he turned back to her, holding out one hand, palm up, patient, waiting. "Come on," he said gently. "I got you. I'm not gonna let anything happen to you. Not tonight. Not ever, if I got anything to say about it." For a long moment she just stood there, staring at his outstretched hand, like she wasn't sure if hands could be trusted at all. Then, slowly, she stepped forward and let him lift her small, trembling body onto the bike in front of him. The clubhouse sat at the edge of town, a squat brick building with a gravel lot and a faded sign that just said members only. Tank rode slow, slower than he'd ever ridden in his life, one arm wrapped tight around the small body pressed against his chest. He could feel her shivering through his shirt. He could feel how still she held herself, like moving might break something. The porch light was on. Through the front window, he could see the flicker of the television and hear, faintly, the low rumble of voices and the slap of cards on a table. Old habits. Some things never changed, not even after 20 years of the club going soft around the edges. He killed the engine in the gravel lot and sat there a moment, just breathing. Then he swung his leg over, careful, and lifted the girl down with him, keeping her wrapped in his jacket, keeping her close. She didn't fight him. She didn't do anything at all, really, just let herself be carried, her head resting against his shoulder, eyes open but far away. He pushed the door open with his boot. "Hey, Tank. You're back late. We saved you a hand." Bobby Ruiz looked up from his cards first, cigarette hanging from his lip, and the words died in his mouth. The room went quiet fast. Cards stopped mid-shuffle. Big Pete set down his beer without drinking it. Every eye in the place landed on the bundle in Tank's arms, on the small bare foot poking out from under the leather, on the raw red mark circling her thin wrist. "Found her on Route 9, Tank said. His voice came out rougher than he meant it to. Walking the center line. Barefoot, nightgown, that's all she had on her. Nobody said anything for a second. Then the room moved all at once, like a switch had been flipped. "Get her by the fire," said Old Man Denny, already up from his chair, already dragging it closer to the wood stove in the corner. "It's cold as hell out there tonight. I got a blanket in my truck. My granddaughter left it last time she visited," Bobby said, and he was out the door before he finished the sentence, boots crunching fast across the gravel. Tank carried her to the chair Denny had pulled over and knelt down, easing her into it, keeping the jacket wrapped tight around her shoulders. She sat there small and stiff, staring at nothing, and the fire cast an orange glow across her pale face. "She said anything?" Pete asked quietly, coming to crouch beside Tank, his big hands hovering like he wasn't sure what to do with them. "Not a word," Tank said. "Not one." Bobby came back in with the blanket, pink with faded cartoon horses on it, and draped it over her lap, tucking the edges around her bare feet. "There you go, sweetheart," he murmured, voice gone gentle in a way that didn't match his size at all. "Nice and warm now." Somebody warm up some milk, Denny said. Kids like warm milk. My grandkids always did. Pete was already moving toward the little kitchen behind the bar, banging through cabinets until he found a pot, filling it at the sink, muttering to himself about how much milk a body needed for a girl her size. Tank stayed crouched in front of her, watching her face for any flicker of something, any sign she understood what was happening around her. Her eyes moved, slow, taking in the room. The men. The fire. She didn't flinch at the noise or the sudden movement. Maybe she was too tired. Maybe she'd used up every bit of fear she had left out there on that dark road. Somebody should keep watch, Tank said, not looking away from her. Just in case whoever did this comes looking. I got it. That was Sal, quiet as always, already moving toward the front door, taking up a post beside it like a soldier, arms crossed, eyes on the parking lot through the window. Pete came back with a mug of warm milk and set it on the little table beside her chair, careful not to get too close too fast. For you, whenever you want it, he said softly. No rush. She looked at the mug. She looked at the fire. She looked, finally, at Tank, and at the angel patch stitched onto the vest he'd put back on. Her small fingers reached out from under the blanket and touched it. Just barely. Just for a second. She still didn't speak. The fire had burned low by the time the sky outside the windows started turning gray at the edges. Nobody had slept. The girl hadn't moved much from the chair, though at some point Bobby had coaxed her, inch by inch, over to the old couch against the far wall, where she now sat with her knees drawn up and the pink blanket wrapped around her like a shell. Tank stood near the bar with Pete and Denny, keeping his voice low so it wouldn't carry. We can't just keep her here, Denny said, rubbing a hand over his gray stubble. I know what you're thinking, Tank. I know how you feel about cops and caseworkers. God knows you got reasons. But this ain't something we can fix on our own. I know that, Tank said, sharper than he meant. He caught himself, softened it. I know that, Denny. She needs a doctor, Pete added. Look at her wrist. That ain't nothing. Somebody needs to look at that proper, get pictures, get it on record. We don't do that right. Whoever did this walks. Tank looked over at the couch. In the dim orange light of the dying fire, the girl looked even smaller than she had on the road, swallowed up in blanket and shadow, her eyes half open but far away, tracking nothing. I aged out of the system, Tank said quietly. 18 years old, they handed me a garbage bag with my stuff in it and said good luck. Nobody came looking for me before that either. Not once in 10 years did anybody check if I was okay. He shook his head. I know what happens to kids the system forgets. This is different, Denny said. You found her. You're not handing her off and walking away. You're standing right here making sure it's done right. Sal spoke up from his post by the window, arms still crossed. Every hour we wait is an hour her family, or whoever did this, could be looking for her too. Not the good kind of looking, Tank, that landed. Tank exhaled slow, dragging a hand down his face. He looked at the girl again. She'd shifted slightly, her eyes drifting toward the small huddle of men, watching them the way a rabbit watches a hawk circling far overhead, waiting to see which way it would turn. All right, Tank said finally. All right, we call it in. He crossed the room slow, crouching down in front of the couch, so he was at her eye level, the way he'd done out on the road. Her gaze flicked to his face, then to the patch on his vest, then back to his face. Hey, he said, gentle, I gotta call some people. Good people. They're gonna come check on you, make sure you're okay. Might be police, might be somebody called a social worker. They're not gonna hurt you. I promise you that." The word landed like a stone dropped in still water. Police, her whole body went rigid. The blanket slipped a little as her shoulders hunched up toward her ears, and her eyes, which had been dull and distant all night, suddenly went wide and sharp with something Tank recognized instantly. Fear, real fear, the kind that lived deep in the bones. Hey. Tank kept his voice low, steady, the same voice he used on spooked dogs and stalled engines. "Look at me. Nobody's gonna hurt you. Not while I'm here. You understand me? I'm not going anywhere." She didn't answer. She never answered, but her eyes stayed locked on his, searching his face for the lie she was sure must be hiding there somewhere. "I know," Tank said softly. "I know you don't trust that word. Maybe you got good reason not to. But I'm right here. I'm not leaving this room. Whatever happens, happens with me standing next to you." Slowly, so slowly he almost didn't notice it happening, her shoulders came down a fraction. Her grip on the blanket loosened just slightly. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. But she leaned, just barely, toward him instead of away. Tank stayed crouched there a long time, until his knees ached and the fire had gone down to embers. Until her breathing evened out, and her eyes finally slid shut, exhaustion winning out over fear. She curled into the corner of the couch, small and still, asleep at last, while behind him he heard Pete quietly dialing the phone. Morning came soft and gray, the kind of light that made everything look tired. By 8 o'clock, 2 cars pulled into the gravel lot outside the clubhouse. One was a county sheriff's cruiser, dust coating its sides from the back roads. The other was a plain sedan, government white, with a woman behind the wheel who looked like she hadn't had her coffee yet. Tank met them at the door before they could knock. He'd changed his shirt, run a hand through his hair, tried to look like something other than what the newspapers liked to print about men like him. It didn't matter much. The officer, a heavy-set man named Deputy Ruiz, looked past Tank's shoulder into the clubhouse with the wary eyes of a man expecting trouble. "Morning," Ruiz said. "You're the one who called this in?" "That's right," Tank said. "Girl's inside. She's asleep, or she was a few minutes ago. Hasn't said a word all night." The caseworker introduced herself as Miss Prentice, young, brisk, clipboard already out. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Where did you find her?" "Middle of Route 9, Tank said. "About 3 miles from here. Walking down the center line barefoot." Ruiz's jaw tightened. "And the restraint?" Tank held up the small plastic bag Denny had found in the kitchen drawer, the one they'd used to seal up the broken padlock and the short length of chain still looped through it. He'd almost thrown it away in the night, some old instinct telling him not to trust the system with evidence, but Pete had talked him out of it. "You do this right," Pete had said. "Or he walks." Ruiz took the bag, turned it over in his gloved hands, studying the lock. His face didn't change much, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Mind if I take this out to the car? Run the serial off it?" "Serial number on a padlock?" Denny asked, leaning against the doorway with his arms crossed. "These industrial ones, sometimes," Ruiz said. "If it was purchased through certain suppliers, county included, for group homes and foster placements, there's tracking. Long shot. But worth trying." He walked back out to the cruiser while Miss Prentice went inside to see the girl. Tank followed close behind, close enough that when Lily's eyes fluttered open and found a stranger crouching near her, close enough that he could catch her hand before the panic fully took hold. "It's okay," he said quietly. "This is Miss Prentice. She's here to help you." "I'm right here." Lily's eyes cut to Tank, then back to the woman, and she said nothing, but she didn't scream, didn't bolt. She let the woman look at her wrist, wincing as gentle fingers examined the raw skin where the chain had rubbed it near to bleeding. Prentice's mouth pressed into a thin line as she wrote something on her clipboard, and Tank saw her hand shake, just slightly, before she steadied it. They waited almost 20 minutes before Ruiz came back inside, phone still in hand, his expression somewhere between surprised and relieved. "Got a hit," he said. "That lock and chain, they're registered to a supply order out of the county child welfare office. Purchased 2 years back for a licensed foster home." He checked his notes. "Belongs to a man named Daryl Combs. Runs a foster placement out on Miller Road, maybe 2 miles from here." The name meant nothing to Tank, but Denny let out a low whistle from across the room. "Combs?" he said. "The fella that was in the paper a few months back? Big write-up, wasn't it? Community award or something?" "That's him," Ruiz said, nodding slowly, something like real relief creeping into his voice for the first time since he'd arrived. "Spotless record. Fostered, what, 6, 7 kids over the years? County's practically held him up as a model case." He looked at Tank, at the sleeping girl, and for the first time all morning, he almost smiled. "Might be this is simpler than we thought. Kid probably wandered off, got scared, that lock's probably some kind of safety thing gone wrong. We get her back to the Combs place, get this whole thing sorted, probably have her back home by lunch." Behind him, Miss Prentice was already reaching for her phone, ready to make the call that would, they all believed in that moment, put this whole nightmare, quietly and cleanly, to rest. Denny went to the kitchen to make more coffee, and on his way back, he grabbed the newspaper off the counter, the one that had come with the milk delivery 2 days before, and nobody had gotten around to reading yet. He set it down on the clubhouse table without thinking much of it, just clearing space so Miss Prentice could set her clipboard down while she waited on hold with the county office. The front page had a photo of the county fair from last weekend, some kid holding a blue ribbon next to a goat. But below the fold, there was a smaller article with its own photo. A man in a collared shirt standing on a porch, smiling the kind of smile that men practice in mirrors. The headline read, "Local foster father honored for years of service to community's children." Tank didn't pay it any mind. He was crouched near the couch where Lily sat wrapped in his leather jacket, still not eating much of the toast Pete had made her, but at least holding it in her hands now, turning it over like she wasn't sure what to do with something so ordinary. "You warm enough?" Tank asked her, keeping his voice low and even, the same tone he used on nervous dogs and skittish new hires. "Nobody's gonna touch that lock again. It's gone. You understand me?" "Gone." Lily looked at him. Her lips moved, barely, like she was testing the shape of words she hadn't used in a long time. "Lily," she whispered. Tank went still. "What's that, sweetheart?" "My name," she said, so quiet he almost missed it. "It's Lily." Something in Tank's chest cracked open, warm and aching at once. "Lily," he repeated, like he was trying the name on, making sure it fit right. "That's a real pretty name." She almost smiled. Almost, and that was when her eyes drifted past him, toward the table, toward the newspaper Denny had set down without a second thought. Tank saw it happen before he understood it. Her whole body went rigid, every muscle locking at once, the toast falling from her fingers and landing soft on the floor. Her eyes were fixed on the photo, on that smiling man in the collared shirt on his porch, and the color drained out of her face so fast Tonk thought for a second she might pass out. "Lily?" She didn't answer. She didn't even seem to hear him. A sound came out of her, small and broken, not quite a scream, more like the air being punched out of her lungs, and then she was moving, scrambling off the couch so fast the jacket slid off her shoulders and puddled on the floor. She was under the pool table before anyone could react, curled into the tightest ball her small body could make, arms wrapped over her head, shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. "Hey, hey, hey," Tank dropped to his knees, moving slow, hands out and open where she could see them. "You're okay. Nobody's gonna hurt you. Look at me, Lily, look at me." She didn't look at him. She was rocking now, whispering something under her breath, over and over, too quiet for anyone to make out. "Miss," Prentice had frozen with the phone still against her ear, the county office on hold, forgotten. Ruiz stood in the doorway, his easy relief from a few minutes ago gone completely, replaced by something sharper, more alert. "What happened?" he said. "The paper," Denny said, staring at it like it had turned into a snake on the table. She saw the paper. It was Pete who found the backpack a few minutes later, tucked behind the porch steps outside, where Lily must have hidden it sometime in the night before Tank ever found her on the road. Small, pink, the zipper half broken. He brought it inside without a word and set it on the table, unzipping it slow, like it might bite. Crayon drawings spilled out, dozens of them, done in a child's careful, desperate hand. A shed with a door that didn't open from the inside. A length of chain, drawn again and again in different pictures. Always the same, always wrapped around a small stick figure's wrist. And in almost every drawing, a man, tall, faceless, holding something long and thin in his hand. A belt. Ruiz picked up one of the drawings, his face gone pale and hard all at once, and looked over at the newspaper still lying open on the table, at that smiling photo of Daryl Combs standing proud on his porch. The next morning came gray and heavy, the kind of sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain. Tank hadn't slept. He'd sat in the chair next to the couch where Lily finally dozed off around 4, her small body curled tight even in sleep, like she was still bracing for something. He watched her breathe for hours, counting each rise and fall like it was proof of something he needed to believe. By 8, Officer Reyes was back at the clubhouse, along with the caseworker from the night before, a tired-looking woman named Miss Prentice, who had dark circles under her eyes to match Tank's own. They sat at the same table where the newspaper still lay, though someone had turned it face down sometime in the night. Nobody wanted to look at that smiling photo again. "We opened an investigation into Daryl Combs first thing this morning," Reyes said. His voice was flat, careful, the voice of a man delivering news he didn't like giving. "The drawings, what Lily's shown us so far, it's enough to get things moving. County's pulling his records, all the kids he's fostered over the years. This isn't going away quiet, I can promise you that." Tank nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "Good," he said. "That man needs to answer for what he did." "He will," Reyes said. "But it's going to take time. Investigations like this, they don't move fast. There's interviews, there's evidence to gather, there's a process." Tank's eyes narrowed. "And Lily? What happens to her while all that's happening?" "Miss." Prentice shifted in her seat, her clipboard held tight against her chest like a shield. "She'll need a temporary placement. she said. Standard procedure. We have a foster family lined up, good people, experienced with trauma cases. She'll be safe there while the investigation runs its course. Something cold dropped through Tank's stomach. Another foster home, he repeated. It's temporary, Prentice said again, like the word could soften what she was saying. Once the investigation concludes, and depending on what happens with Combs, we'll look at long-term options. Family, if any can be located. Otherwise, adoption proceedings, if that's the direction things go. She spent one night here, Tank said, his voice low. One night where she felt safe enough to tell me her own name. And now you want to hand her off to strangers again? Mr. Malone, I understand this is difficult. You don't understand a damn thing, Tank said. And then caught himself. Took a breath. Because Lily was still asleep on that couch 10 feet away, and the last thing she needed was raised voices in a room that was supposed to be safe. He lowered his voice, but the steel in it didn't go anywhere. I aged out of the system. Miss Prentice, 18 years old, no family, no home, nothing but a duffel bag and a bus ticket to nowhere. I know what happens to kids who get passed around from home to home. They stop trusting anybody. They stop believing anyone's gonna stay. Prentice said nothing, but her eyes had softened just slightly, like she was really looking at him now, instead of just the leather vest and the tattoos. She trusts me, Tank said. Maybe I'm the only person in this whole mess she's had a chance to trust so far. And you're telling me the plan is to take that away from her and hand her off to somebody she's never met? It's how the system works, Reyes said, gently. Then, the system's wrong. Tank stood up so fast his chair scraped loud against the floor. He looked toward the couch, toward Lily, still sleeping, one small hand curled against her chest where the padlock used to be. Something in him settled then, hard and certain, the way a wrench finally catches on a stripped bolt. I want to file for emergency guardianship, he said. Me, right now. Today, if that's what it takes. Miss Prentice blinked, her pen frozen halfway to her clipboard. Miss Malone, that's not something people usually just decide overnight. There's background checks, home inspections, a whole process. I don't care what it takes. Tank said, I'm not letting her disappear into another house full of strangers. Not while I'm still breathing. The law office of Margaret Ellis sat above a hardware store on Main Street, the kind of place easy to miss unless you knew to look for the small brass sign by the side door. Tank had never set foot in a lawyer's office in his life. He'd spent 45 years avoiding rooms like this, rooms with diplomas on the wall and secretaries who eyed his leather vest like it might bite. But Earl Baxter, who'd been bringing his old Ford truck into Tank's shop for 15 years and never once got charged full price, had sworn up and down that Margaret was different. She'll listen, Earl had said, before she judges. That's more than you'll get most places. Tank climbed the narrow stairs slow, his boots heavy on each step, and pushed open the door at the top. The waiting room was small, just 2 chairs and a coffee table with magazines nobody had touched in months. A young receptionist looked up, her eyes flicking over the patches on his vest, the ink on his knuckles, before she managed a polite smile. Mr. Malone? Miss Ellis will see you now. Margaret Ellis turned out to be a tall woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back tight and reading glasses pushed up on her head. She had the look of someone who didn't waste time, sharp eyes that took in everything at once. She didn't stand when he walked in, just gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Misty." "Malone, Earl says you've got a situation." "That's one word for it," Tonk said, and sat down carefully, like the chair might not hold his weight even though it clearly could. He told her everything. The road at 3 in the morning. The padlock still clasped around that small wrist. The way she hadn't screamed or run, just stood there in the headlights like she'd forgotten how to expect anything different. He told her about the clubhouse, about the newspaper photo that made Lily go rigid and bolt under the pool table. About the drawings. The shed. The belt. Margaret listened without interrupting, her pen still against the legal pad in front of her. When Tank finally got to the part about Miss Prentice and the temporary placement, about filing for emergency guardianship, she set the pen down entirely. "Mr. Malone, I'm going to be straight with you," she said. "A single man, unmarried, no biological relation to the child, president of a motorcycle club that half this county still thinks is some kind of outlaw gang. That's not an easy case. That's not even a hard case. Some lawyers would call it impossible." "I don't care what it looks like," Tank said. "I care what's true. She trusts me. That's not nothing." "It's not nothing," Margaret agreed. "But trust doesn't show up on a background check. A judge is going to look at your criminal record, if you've got one. Your finances. Your living situation. Whether you can prove stability, whether you can prove you understand what a traumatized child actually needs, day in and day out. Not just for one good night. Then help me prove it," Tank said. And something in his voice cracked just slightly, just enough that Margaret's sharp eyes softened for the first time since he'd walked in. "I aged out of the system myself. Nobody fought for me. Nobody showed up. I know exactly what it feels like to be a kid nobody wants to claim. I'm not going to let that happen to her if there's anything I can do to stop it." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, studying him. Not the vest, not the tattoos, not the rough hands folded together like he was praying without meaning to. She was studying his eyes, the way they'd gone soft and wet, just talking about a little girl he'd known less than a day. "You really care about this kid," she said finally. "It wasn't a question. More than anything I've cared about in a long time," Tank said. Margaret picked her pen back up. "All right, Mr. Malone, I'll take your case. Pro bono, since Earl's vouched for you, and frankly, something in my gut says he's right about you." She leaned forward. "But I want you to understand something. This is going to be an uphill fight. The county's going to dig into everything about you and your club. This town's going to have opinions, and not all of them kind. You need to be ready for that." "I've been ready my whole life," Tank said. "Let's get started." The news moved through town faster than Tank could have imagined. He should have known better. This was the kind of place where a stranger buying gas got talked about for a week. A Hell's Angel trying to adopt an abused little girl, that was the kind of story that ran through every kitchen and coffee shop before the sun even set twice. He felt it first at the diner. Rosie's Diner had been his Tuesday morning spot for 6 years. A plate of eggs and bacon, black coffee, the same booth by the window. Rosie herself had never charged him for pie. Not once. Not since he'd fixed her son's transmission for free back when the boy was struggling to get to his night classes. But this Tuesday, when he walked in, the conversation at the counter went quiet. 2 women in church cardigans looked up from their coffee, their eyes narrow and assessing, and one of them leaned close to whisper something to the other. Tank didn't need to hear the words. He'd seen that look enough times in his life to know what it meant. Rosie still smiled when she brought his coffee, but even her smile seemed careful now, like she was measuring something. "Heard about the little girl," she said quietly, refilling his cup even though it was still half full. "Whole town's heard." "And?" Tank asked, not looking up from his eggs. "And some folks got opinions," Rosie said. "You know how it is." He knew how it was. At the hardware store, picking up a part he needed for the shop, the man behind the counter, a fellow named Pete he'd known for years, made small talk about the weather and the price of lumber, but never once met his eyes. When Tank mentioned he needed to get going, Pete said, almost too quickly, "Good luck with everything, Tank," in a tone that made it clear he'd heard the whispers too, and wasn't sure which side of them to stand on. The worst of it came on Sunday, though he hadn't even meant to be near the church. He'd just been riding past on his way back from the clubhouse, taking the long way to clear his head, when he saw the parking lot full of cars and families in their Sunday best. A cluster of women stood near the church steps, and one of them, a woman Tank vaguely recognized from town council meetings, was talking loud enough that her voice carried across the lot. "I just don't understand how the county could even consider it." A biker. Running with those men. What kind of home is that for a child who's already been through so much? Another voice, softer but no less pointed, answered her. "I heard he doesn't even have a wife. Just him and all those men at that clubhouse. It's not natural." Tank kept riding. He didn't slow down, didn't look at them, didn't let his face show anything at all. But something in his chest went tight and cold, an old feeling. One he remembered from being 16 years old and standing in a caseworker's office while she talked about him like he wasn't even in the room. Troubled. Difficult placement. Not the kind of home most families want. By the time he pulled into the clubhouse lot that evening, the sun was low and orange, and his shoulders felt like they were carrying the weight of the whole county. He parked his bike slow, cut the engine, and sat there for a long moment before he even took his helmet off. Big Mike was waiting on the porch, arms crossed, reading something on his face before Tonk even said a word. "Rough day," Mike said. "Not a question." "Whole town thinks I'm gonna ruin that kid's life," Tank said, voice flat and tired. Mike didn't argue with him, didn't try to talk him out of the feeling. He just nodded toward the door. "Ms. Prentice called about an hour ago. Lily's over at the Hendersons, that emergency placement not far from here. Said Lily's been asking for you." Tank looked up. "Asking for me?" "Wouldn't say your name," Mike said, the corner of his mouth twitching just slightly. "Called you the Angel Man. Wouldn't settle down till they promised they'd tell you." Something loosened in Tank's chest, just a little, just enough to breathe. All the whispers, all the sideways looks, all the doubt sitting heavy on his shoulders, none of it mattered half as much as those 3 words, the Angel Man. He stood up straighter. "Then I guess I better go see her." The community center smelled like floor wax and old coffee, a plain brick building with a room set aside just for visits like this one. Folding tables. Plastic chairs. A box of toys in the corner that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Too bright, too white. Not exactly the kind of place a man could feel at ease in, but Tank supposed that was the point. This wasn't about his comfort. A woman named Miss Prentice sat near the door with a clipboard, watching everything, writing things down every few minutes. Supervised visit, they called it. Tank understood why. He was a stranger to the system, a man with a record from his younger years and a leather vest covered in patches that made people nervous. He didn't blame them for being careful. He just hated how careful made him feel, sitting in a plastic chair too small for his frame, hands folded in his lap like a man waiting for a verdict. Lily sat across from him. Someone had brushed her hair and put her in a clean yellow dress, but her eyes were the same as that night on the road, hollow, watching, waiting for something bad to happen. She didn't look at the small stuffed bear he'd brought her, a soft brown thing with a stitched smile, sitting on the table between them like an offering nobody wanted to touch. "Hey there," Tank said, keeping his voice low and easy the way he'd learned to talk to spooked animals and spooked people both. "Brought you something. Thought you might like him." Lily's eyes flicked to the bear, then away. She said nothing. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, small and still, like she'd trained herself not to reach for things anymore. The first visit passed like that. 30 minutes of silence, of Tank talking softly about nothing much, the weather, the shop, a dog that hung around the clubhouse. Lily never spoke. She never touched the bear. But she didn't look away from him either, not completely, and Tank told himself that counted for something. The second visit, he brought a small toy motorcycle, a little metal thing he'd picked up at the hardware store, sanded down so the edges wouldn't cut her fingers. This time, she looked at it a little longer. Her hand moved an inch across the table before she pulled it back, like she'd caught herself doing something dangerous. "Miss," Prentice made a note. Tank pretended not to notice, pretended his heart wasn't cracking a little wider every time the girl flinched away from kindness like it might turn into something else. "You don't have to talk," he told her, gentle, like he was talking to himself just as much as her. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to. I'll just sit here." And he did. He sat there the whole 30 minutes, saying little, asking nothing, just being present the way Big Mike had taught him without ever saying the words out loud. Sometimes safety wasn't about promises. Sometimes it was just about showing up and staying still. By the third visit, something had shifted, small but real. Lily was already sitting at the table when he walked in, her legs swinging beneath the chair, not touching the floor. The stuffed bear from the first visit was tucked under her arm now, worn soft in one ear where she'd clearly been holding it at night. Tank noticed, but didn't say anything, just settled into the chair across from her, careful and slow. They sat in their usual quiet for a while. Then, without warning, Lily's hand moved across the table again. This time it didn't stop. Her small fingers reached out and touched the patch on his vest, the little angel stitched in gold thread over his heart. The same patch that had softened something in her that very first night on the road. She traced it with one finger. Slow. Careful, like she was checking it was real. Then, she looked up at him, her eyes wide and searching, older than they should have been for a girl her age. "Are you going to send me back?" she whispered. The words landed like a fist in Tank's chest. He felt them settle somewhere deep, somewhere that ached, somewhere that had been aching since he was a boy standing alone, with nothing but a bag of clothes and no one waiting for him anywhere. Tank did not answer Lily's question that day. He couldn't. Miss Prentice had already called time on the visit, and the words "Are you going to send me back?" followed him out of the community center and into the parking lot, where he sat on his bike for a long time without starting the engine. He thought about that question every night for a week. It was still sitting heavy in his chest when he walked into Margaret Ellis's office on a Tuesday afternoon, his boots loud on the thin carpet. Margaret was a small woman with sharp eyes and a desk covered in file folders. She had taken his case for free after their first meeting, though she'd been honest about the odds. "The judge is going to see a Hell's Angel," she told him, tapping a pen against a legal pad. "A man with a record, tattoos up both arms. That's what he'll see first, before he sees anything else. We need to change that picture before he ever sits down in that courtroom." "How do I do that?" Tank asked. "Character witnesses," Margaret said. "People in this town who know who you really are. People with clean reputations. People the judge will trust. We need them to stand up and tell the truth about you." Tank rubbed a hand over his jaw. The idea of asking people to vouch for him, to stand up in front of a judge and speak on his behalf, sat wrong in his stomach. He wasn't a man who asked for things. He gave help quietly and walked away before anyone could thank him properly. That was how he liked it. But then he thought of Lily's small finger tracing the angel patch on his vest, her voice barely above a whisper. He'd do things he didn't like if it meant keeping that promise to her, even the promise he hadn't spoken out loud yet. His first stop was the diner on Main Street, a squat little building with a faded sign and coffee that never quite tasted fresh. Ruth Gaines owned the place, a heavy-set woman with tired eyes who'd been running it alone since her husband passed. Tank had fixed her delivery truck more times than he could count, always refusing payment, always telling her to buy something nice for her grandkids instead. He found her wiping down the counter, and when he asked, haltingly, if she'd be willing to speak for him in court, she set the rag down and looked at him like he'd asked a foolish question. "Tank Malone," she said, "you kept this diner running through some of the hardest years of my life and never took a dime for it. Course I'll speak for you. Just tell me when." Next was Eleanor Hastings, a widow who lived 2 streets over from the shop, in a small house with a porch that had been rotting through until Tonk noticed it one afternoon and quietly rebuilt it over a weekend, refusing again to accept any payment. She was slower to answer the door these days, moving with a cane, but her eyes lit up when she saw him standing there. "You want me to talk about you being a good man?" she said, laughing softly. "Lord, son, I could talk all day. Come in, sit down. Let me get my thoughts together." She told him stories he'd half forgotten, about the groceries left on her step during a hard winter, about the time he'd driven her to a doctor's appointment 2 towns over without being asked, simply because he'd noticed her waiting at the bus stop in the rain. Then he went to see Pastor Dave, a heavy-set man with a booming laugh who played poker with Tank and a handful of others every Thursday night, always losing badly and blaming it cheerfully on bad luck. The pastor didn't hesitate either. "Tank," he said, gripping his hand, "you've done more quiet good in this town than half my congregation put together. I'd be honored to stand up and say so." One by one, they agreed. Each one had a story Tank hadn't expected them to remember, small moments he'd nearly forgotten himself, tucked away and carried quietly by the people he'd helped without ever asking for thanks. Walking back to his bike that evening, something loosened in Tank's chest. Something that had been tight and afraid since the night he'd found Lily on that dark road. Maybe the town's true opinion of him ran deeper than the leather and ink people saw first. Maybe there was hope in that, more than he'd let himself believe. The courtroom smelled like old wood and floor wax. Tank sat at the table beside Margaret Ellis, his hands folded so tight his knuckles had gone pale. He'd worn the only suit he owned, a dark gray one that hadn't fit quite right in years. And he'd left his vest at home. Though it felt strange, like leaving a piece of his own skin behind. Judge Harmon was an older man with silver hair and reading glasses that sat low on his nose. He looked at Tank for a long moment before he spoke, and Tank made himself sit still under that gaze, the way he might sit still under a mechanic's light, waiting to be found broken somewhere. "Mr. Malone," the judge said, "you are the president of a motorcycle club. You have a criminal record from your 20s, including a charge of assault. You run a business that keeps you occupied long hours, and you are asking this court to grant you guardianship of a 6-year-old girl who has suffered severe trauma." He paused. "Convince me this is a good idea." Tank's mouth went dry. Margaret had told him this moment would come, had prepared him for it, but hearing it out loud in that quiet room made his chest feel tight all the same. "Your Honor," he said, his voice rougher than he meant it to be, "I can't tell you my life looks the way most folks think a good home should look. I know what people see when they look at me, but I found that little girl on the side of the road at 3 a.m. with a chain still on her wrist. I didn't walk away. I haven't walked away since. I just want the chance to keep not walking away." The judge said nothing, only made a note, and gestured for Margaret to call her first witness. Ruth Gaines went first, twisting a tissue in her hands as she talked about the years Tank kept her diner running for free. Then came Eleanor Hastings, walking slow with her cane, describing the porch he rebuilt and the groceries left on her step in the dead of winter. Pastor Dave spoke last among them, his big voice filling the room as he talked about Thursday night poker games and a man who gave more than he ever let anyone give back. Then Miss Prentice, the caseworker, took the stand. She talked about Lily's file, the hollow silence she'd carried in the first days, the flinching at raised voices. And then she talked about the change. In the weeks since Lily has been in contact with Mr. Malone and the members of his club, she said, "I have observed a significant improvement in her demeanor. She speaks now, in short sentences. She makes eye contact. She has begun to laugh, which she did not do at all in the beginning. She seeks Mr. Malone out. She trusts him." She looked at the judge. "In my professional opinion, removing her from that stability now would cause more harm than good." The judge took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The room was so quiet Tank could hear his own heartbeat. "Mr. Malone," the judge finally said, "the law asks me to look past appearances and look at the evidence in front of me. The evidence here is a child who is healing and a community full of people willing to stand up and speak for your character. That carries weight in this court." He picked up his pen. "I am granting emergency temporary guardianship to Tank Malone, effective immediately, pending the outcome of the criminal case against Daryl Combs." Tank didn't move at first. It was like the words hadn't fully landed, like he was waiting for some catch, some sentence after the sentence that would take it all back. Margaret touched his arm, and only then did he feel his own eyes burning. The bailiff opened the side door, and Miss Prentice walked in with Lily beside her, small and solemn in a yellow dress someone had picked out for the occasion. Lily's eyes swept the room until they found Tank, and something in her face loosened, the same way something in his chest had loosened outside the diner. "You get to come home with me now," Tank said, his voice cracking on the last word. Lily crossed the floor and put her hand in his, small and warm, and Tank Malone, a man who had spent 45 years learning not to cry in front of anyone, felt the tears slide down his face without any shame at all. Tank's house had never felt small until he pulled into the driveway with Lily asleep against the seatbelt, her head tipped sideways, one hand still holding the hem of her yellow dress like she was afraid it might disappear if she let go. He'd lived alone in that house for almost 20 years. 2 bedrooms, one he slept in, one that had become a place to pile boxes and old motorcycle parts he swore he'd fix someday. He hadn't touched that second room in years. Now, looking at it through the eyes of a 6-year-old girl, it looked exactly like what it was. A room nobody wanted. He carried Lily inside careful as glass, laid her on his own bed, and stood in the doorway of the spare room with his hands on his hips, feeling more lost than he had in that courtroom. His phone buzzed. Big Sam, one of the brothers, had been texting him all afternoon. "Sam, she gonna need a nightlight. Kids like that don't do good with dark. Sam also gets soft sheets. Not the scratchy kind. My granddaughter cries if the tag itches her neck." 10 minutes later, another buzz. This one from Cutter, a broad man with a beard down to his chest and a heart Tank had seen break more than once over the years. "Cutter, bring her something that smells like you. My boy used to sleep with my old shirt when he was scared." Smell means safe. Tank sat on the edge of the bare mattress in that dusty spare room and let out a breath. He didn't know the first thing about decorating a child's room. He knew engines. He knew how to read a man's silence and know if trouble was coming. He didn't know how to make a broken little girl feel like she belonged somewhere. But he had brothers who did, or who'd learned enough from raising their own kids and grandkids, and for the next 2 hours, that's exactly what happened. Doc, who ran the pharmacy counter 3 towns over, drove by with a plug-in nightlight shaped like a moon. Ricky, the youngest of the club, showed up with a stuffed rabbit his daughter had outgrown, worn soft at the ears from years of hugging. Pastor Dave brought a quilt his wife had sewn for their own grandbabies, faded blue with little white stars. By the time Tank had the room together, boxes shoved into the garage, motorcycle parts hauled out to the shed, the room barely looked like the same space. A lamp shaped like a moon glowed soft in the corner. The bed was made up with the star quilt. The rabbit sat propped against the pillow, and on the nightstand, folded neatly, sat one of Tank's old flannel shirts, the one Cutter told him to leave out. When Lily woke up, groggy and blinking, Tank carried her in and set her down on the edge of the new bed. She looked around slow, taking it all in with the same careful watchfulness she gave everything. Like she was checking the room for exits, for danger, for reasons not to trust it. "This is yours," Tank said quietly. "All of it. Nobody's gonna take it from you." Lily didn't say anything. She reached out and touched the rabbit's ear, then pulled the flannel shirt close and pressed her face into it, breathing in. "You don't have to sleep yet if you're scared," Tank said. "I'll leave the hall light on, and I'll be right outside if you need me." She looked at him then, really looked, her small face pale in the moonlight glow, and gave the smallest nod Tank had ever seen a person give. He left the door cracked open and the hallway light burning, and he lowered himself down onto the floor outside her room, his back against the wall, his knees creaking in protest. He told himself he'd sit there a few minutes, just until she settled. A few minutes turned into an hour. The house ticked and settled around them. Somewhere past midnight, Tank heard her breathing change, slow and even, the sound of a child finally letting go of the fight to stay awake and alert. He didn't move from the floor. Not for a long while after that. The days took on a shape, and Tank found there was comfort in that shape, the way there was comfort in the click of a wrench finding the right bolt. Mornings were the hardest. Lily didn't like the school bus, the noise of other kids, the closed-in feeling of a classroom with a door that shut. So Tank drove her himself, his truck idling in the pickup line between minivans, and every morning she'd sit with her backpack on her lap, gripping the straps until her knuckles went pale. "You don't have to be brave," Tank told her one morning, watching the other kids stream past the truck window. "You just have to walk through the door. That's all. One door." She'd looked at him with those careful eyes, and something in her seemed to steady. Just a little. She walked through the door. Tuesdays and Thursdays were therapy, a small office with soft chairs and a woman named Dr. Reyes, who spoke slow and never raised her voice. Not once. Not even when Lily wouldn't talk for the first 3 sessions straight. Tank sat in the waiting room those afternoons, hands folded, feeling every minute crawl by, wondering what was happening behind that closed door. Praying. It was good. But it was the evenings at the clubhouse that seemed to do the most good, more than Tank ever could have guessed. Cutter took to teaching her whittling, of all things. He'd sit her down at the long wooden table with a soft block of pine and a dull little knife made just for kids, and he'd guide her hands slow and patient, showing her how to shave the wood a little at a time. "Don't rush it," he'd tell her, his big bearded face soft in a way that looked strange on a man his size. "Wood don't forgive rushing. You gotta go slow, and it'll show you what it wants to be." Lily didn't say much those first few sessions, but she watched Cutter's hands like they held some kind of secret, and after a week, she had a lumpy little shape that was maybe a bird, maybe a rabbit. Nobody was quite sure, but she kept it in her pocket everywhere she went. Then there was Ricky, the youngest of the brothers, who couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, but sang to her anyway at bedtime when Tank couldn't be there. Some old song about a river that his own mother used to sing him, his voice cracking on the high notes, off-key and terrible, and somehow exactly right. Lily would lie there with her eyes half closed, the ghost of a smile pulling at her mouth, like she knew he sounded bad and loved him for trying anyway. Big Sam brought his old dog around, a slow golden retriever named Biscuit, who didn't do much of anything except lay in patches of sun and let Lily bury her hands in his fur. That dog did more for her in a week than anybody could have predicted. She started sitting closer to the middle of the room instead of the edges. She started reaching for things instead of waiting to be handed them. Weeks passed this way, and slowly, so slowly Tank almost missed it happening, Lily began to change. She started answering questions with more than one word. She started asking her own, small ones at first, quiet ones about the bikes, about the patches on the men's vests, about why Cutter's beard was so long. Her voice, when it came, was soft and a little rusty, like a door that hadn't been opened in a long time, but it came. Then one evening, near the end of summer, the whole club had gathered at the clubhouse for a cookout, the smell of burgers on the grill drifting through the open garage bay doors, and Ricky was doing some ridiculous dance trying to flip a burger patty with a spatula, and he dropped it, and it landed with a splat right on Cutter's boot. Lily laughed. It came out of her sudden and bright. A real laugh, high and clear, the kind of sound that stopped every man in that garage cold. Tank turned so fast he nearly knocked over his lawn chair. Cutter froze mid-curse. Ricky just stood there grinning like he'd won something bigger than any race he'd ever run. Lily clapped a hand over her mouth like she'd surprised herself, her eyes wide, but the laugh kept bubbling up around her fingers anyway. Tank felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been tight and worried for months finally letting go. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, the brothers sat around the fire pit outside the clubhouse. Quiet for a long moment before Cutter spoke up. "We ought to do something," he said. "Mark it. That laugh." Big Sam nodded slow. Some kind of party. Tank looked at the dying embers of the fire and felt, for the first time in a long while, something that felt an awful lot like hope. The Saturday of the party, the clubhouse looked like it had been hit by a tornado made of bandanas. Cutter had strung them up across the garage bay doors, old faded blue and black ones, cut and knotted together into a kind of ragged banner. Somebody had found a roll of butcher paper and painted "Go Lily" across it in crooked letters, the paint still a little wet in places, smearing when the wind caught it. Big Sam's wife had baked a cake, chocolate with white frosting, and had written Lily across the top in careful pink icing, with a small lopsided angel drawn beside it because she'd heard the story of the patch and thought it fitting. Lily stood in the middle of it all in a yellow sundress, her hair pulled back with a ribbon Ricky's girlfriend had tied that morning, looking around at the garage like she couldn't quite believe it was all for her. "You did this?" she asked Tank, her voice still soft, still a little rusty, but stronger now than it used to be. "We did this," Tank said. "All of us. Because you did something brave." "I just laughed," Lily said. "That's the bravest thing there is," Cutter told her, kneeling down so he was eye level with her. "Took me 40 years to learn that." The party rolled on through the afternoon. Ricky did his terrible dancing again, on purpose this time, spinning in circles with a paper crown someone had made from a pizza box, and Lily laughed so hard she had to sit down on the curb, holding her stomach. Big Sam let her feed Biscuit little pieces of hot dog under the table, pretending not to notice when the dog got more than his fair share. Cutter gave her a new whittling knife, wrapped in a bandana, with a wooden bird he'd carved himself, its wings spread like it was about to fly. "For when your rabbit gets lonely," he said, and Lily hugged the bird to her chest like it was made of gold. When the cake had been cut and the paper plates were scattered across the picnic tables, Tank knelt down next to his bike, the old Harley gleaming black and chrome in the afternoon sun. "You ready?" he asked. Lily's eyes went wide. "Really?" "Really, slow. Just around the lot. I got you." He buckled the small helmet under her chin, checked it twice, then lifted her up onto the seat behind him, her small arms wrapping around his waist, her cheek pressed against the leather of his back. The whole club gathered near the garage doors to watch, phones out, someone whistling. Tank eased the bike forward, slow as a Sunday drive, the gravel crunching soft under the tires. He took the first turn wide and easy, and he felt Lily's arms tighten, not from fear this time, but from something else, something like joy. "Faster?" He called back over his shoulder. "Faster." She yelled, and he grinned and gave it just a little more. Still slow, still careful, but enough that the wind caught her hair where it had come loose from the ribbon, enough that she threw her head back and laughed, that same bright, clear laugh from the cookout, ringing out across the gravel lot for everyone to hear. The brothers cheered. Big Sam wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and pretended it was the dust. Cutter just stood there, grinning like a fool, arms crossed over his chest, watching the girl he'd taught to whittle ride circles on the back of a Hells Angels motorcycle like she'd been born to it. Tank brought the bike around one more time, slow and wide, and as they rolled back toward the garage, he caught sight of a car he didn't recognize pulling into the lot. A sedan, gray, government plates. It parked at an angle near the fence, out of place among the trucks and bikes. A woman stepped out. Sharp suit, a leather folder tucked under one arm, sunglasses pushed up into dark hair pulled back tight. She looked at the bandana banner, the cake, the paper crown lying forgotten on the picnic table, and her mouth pressed into a thin line. "I'm looking for Tank Malone," she said, her voice cutting clean through the noise of the party. "I'm here about the Lily Combs case file. I'm the new caseworker." The garage went quiet. Tank set the kickstand and helped Lily off the bike before he walked toward the woman by the fence. Behind him, he heard the party sounds fade, one by one, like somebody turning down a radio. Cutter moved without being asked, drifting toward Lily, putting his big frame between her and the stranger without making it look like that's what he was doing. "I'm Tank," he said, wiping his hand on his jeans before offering it. She looked at his hand a second too long before shaking it. "Claire Whitfield. County Family Services." She didn't smile. "I need to speak with you. Somewhere quiet, if there's such a place here." Tank glanced back at the garage, at the bandana banner drooping a little in the breeze, at the cake with one corner missing. "Office is around back," he said. "It's not much, but it's quiet." The office was a small room off the garage, a metal desk, 2 folding chairs, a calendar from the auto parts store still turned to March. Claire sat like she'd been in 100 rooms just like it, back straight, folder open on her knee before Tank had even closed the door. "I've reviewed the emergency placement order," she said. "I want to be direct with you, Miss Malone. I have concerns." "About what?" "About all of it." She flipped a page. A motorcycle club functioning as a foster placement. No formal training in trauma care. No female caregiver present in the home on a regular basis. A revolving cast of adult men with, frankly, colorful histories around a 6-year-old girl who has already suffered significant abuse. She looked up at him, steady, not unkind exactly, but not warm either. "I'm not here to make this personal. I'm here to make sure Lily is safe." "She is safe," Tank said. "Safer than she's been in her whole life, from what I can tell. That may be true right now. My job is to look at the long term." Claire closed the folder. "I'd like to observe her. See how she's doing. Ask her a few questions if she's comfortable." Tank walked her back out to the garage himself, feeling the eyes of every brother in the yard following them. Lily was sitting on the curb with Cutter's wooden bird in her lap, stroking its carved wings with one finger. She looked up as Claire approached, and Tank watched her shoulders draw in, just slightly, the old flinch that used to happen at any stranger, any raised voice, any unfamiliar shape in a doorway. "Hi, Lily," Claire said, crouching down, keeping her voice soft, professional. "My name is Claire. I work with kids like you, making sure they're doing okay." Lily didn't answer right away. She looked past Claire, found Tank's eyes, and something in her seemed to settle when she saw him standing there. "I like it here," Lily said finally. "Quiet, but clear." "That's good to hear," Claire said, and wrote something in her folder. She asked a few more questions, gentle enough on the surface, about school, about sleep, about whether anyone had ever yelled at her or scared her since she'd come to live at the clubhouse. Lily answered each one carefully, honestly, and Tank found himself holding his breath through every single one. When Claire finally stood, she thanked Lily, told her to keep drawing, and walked with Tank back toward her car. "She seems stable," Claire admitted. "I'll give you that. But stable isn't the same as safe long-term. I'll be conducting a full review of this placement. Home environment, financial background, the men who have regular contact with her. It's standard procedure." She opened her car door. "I'll be in touch, Mr. Malone." She drove off, gravel crunching under her tires, and the party behind Tank tried to pick back up, but something in the air had changed, like a cloud passing over the sun. That night, long after the bandanas had been taken down and Lily was asleep in her room with the wooden bird on her nightstand, Tank sat on his porch with his phone in his hand, finally dialing Margaret's number. "She's doing a full review," he said when she picked up. "Everything. The club, the money, the men, all of it." "That's not unusual for a case like this," Margaret said. "Careful. It doesn't mean anything's wrong." "Feels like it means everything's about to fall apart," Tank said. He didn't sleep that night. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, thinking about every rough edge in his life that a woman with a folder might find and use to take Lily away. Claire's office smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. It was small, tucked in the back corner of the county building, with a window that looked out on a parking lot instead of anything worth seeing. She liked it that way. No distractions, just her files, and the truth she was paid to dig out of them. She had 3 boxes on her desk that morning, all marked with Daryl Combs's case number. The boxes had come from deep storage, the kind of records nobody pulled unless something had gone very wrong. Something had gone very wrong. She started with the oldest folder first, the one with a rubber band so brittle it snapped when she touched it. Combs had been a licensed foster parent for almost 11 years. 11 years of glowing reviews. 11 years of a caseworker signing off on visits that, looking back now, felt more like formalities than actual checks. Claire had read the man's file twice already, and each time it turned her stomach a little more. Not because of what was in it. Because of what wasn't. She pulled out a legal pad and started a timeline, the way she always did when a case got complicated. Name, date of placement. Date of exit. She wrote Lily's name at the top and started working backward from the emergency removal, cross-referencing every document Combs had filed with the county over the past several years. The first placement checked out. A boy, exited at 18, aged out of the system same as thousands of kids every year. The second checked out too, a transfer to a relative in another county, verified with a phone call Claire made herself just to be sure. She was thorough. She always was. It was the only way to be sure the paperwork matched the person, and not just the story someone wanted you to believe. It was the third file that stopped her cold. A girl. 6 years old at intake, same age Lily had been when Combs took her in. Different name. Different case number. But something about the entry dates made Claire's stomach tighten before she even understood why. The file said the girl had been adopted out of state 2 years ago. Adopted by a family in Ohio. Claire flipped the page, looking for the standard interstate compact paperwork, the ICPC approval that had to accompany any out-of-state adoption. The legal backbone that made a placement like that real. There wasn't one. She sat back in her chair, tapping her pen against the legal pad, telling herself it was probably just missing paperwork, an administrative gap, The kind of clerical mess that happened more often than anyone liked to admit in an underfunded county office. She picked up the phone and called the Interstate Compact office anyway, gave them the case number, waited on hold long enough to finish her cold coffee. The woman on the other end came back with an answer that made Claire's hand go still on the desk. There was no record of that case number in their system. No adoption. No transfer. No family in Ohio matching the name listed in Combs's file. The family didn't exist. Claire pulled every document related to that placement, spreading them across her desk like a hand of cards. The signatures didn't match anything else in Combs's typical paperwork style, too neat, too careful, like someone had taken extra time to make it look official instead of just filling it out the way you did when you weren't hiding something. The adoption certificate itself, when she held it up to the light, had a seal that looked almost right, but not quite. The kind of thing you'd only notice if you'd spent years staring at real ones. She thought about Lily, sitting on that curb at the clubhouse with a carved wooden bird in her lap, flinching when a stranger got too close. She thought about the padlock and chain, the drawings of a shed and a belt. And now, this. Another little girl, 6 years old, who was supposed to have been adopted by a family that had never existed at all. Claire sat very still for a long moment, staring at the fake seal, the fake signature, the fake life someone had built on paper to make a missing child disappear from every record that mattered. Her hands were shaking slightly when she picked up the phone again, this time to call her supervisor, because whatever this was, it was bigger than one bad placement, and it went back further than anyone in that office had realized. Her supervisor didn't pick up. Claire let it ring 6 times, then set the phone back down without leaving a message. Some things weren't meant for voicemail. She would walk down the hall in a minute. First, she needed to finish what she started. She pulled the next box toward her, the one marked with a date range from 11 years back, the earliest Combs had been licensed. If there was a pattern here, and every instinct in her body told her there was, it wouldn't just be in the recent files. She needed to see the whole shape of it. The box smelled like mildew and old ink. She lifted out folder after folder, checking names against her timeline, checking exit dates against real records instead of the ones Combs had typed up himself. Most of it matched. A boy who aged out and was now, according to a quick database search, working construction in the next county over. A sibling pair transferred properly, verified, accounted for. Then, she found a folder near the bottom that wasn't like the others. It was thin. Too thin for a case that had lasted almost 3 years, which was how long the intake sheet said this child had been in Combs's home. The girl's name was Sarah Whitfield, age 6 at intake. Claire's own last name, staring back at her from a stranger's file, made her pause for just a second before she told herself it was a coincidence. Whitfield wasn't such an unusual name. She kept reading. The intake report mentioned the mother had died in a car accident. It mentioned the father was unknown, absent from the child's life since birth. It mentioned an aunt who had tried to gain custody but had been informed, according to a note dated over a year ago, that the child had already been placed for adoption out of state before the aunt's paperwork could be processed. Claire's hands went cold. She had written that exact story herself a year ago in her own case notes. Not about a stranger, about her own family. Her sister Rachel had died in a car accident. Rachel had a daughter, 6 years old at the time, a niece Claire had barely gotten to hold before everything fell apart. before Rachel's ex had disappeared, and the state had taken the girl into care while Claire was still drowning in grief and trying to get her own paperwork in order to take custody. By the time she'd fought through the red tape, she'd been told the girl was already adopted. Gone, a closed door, a family in another state. A life Claire wasn't allowed to be part of, no matter how many calls she made or forms she filed. She had spent over a year telling herself it was for the best. That the girl had a real family now. A stable home. Something Claire in her grief and her one-bedroom apartment could not have given her fast enough. She had told herself that so many times it had almost started to feel true. Her hands trembling, she flipped to the back of the folder where a single photograph was paper-clipped to the intake form. It was old, a little faded, the kind of photo a caseworker takes just for the file and never expects anyone to look at twice. It was a picture of the birth mother, Rachel. Claire stared at her sister's face. The same crooked smile, the same small scar above her left eyebrow from a bicycle accident when she was 9 years old. The same eyes Claire saw every time she looked in a mirror at a version of herself that was softer, kinder, gone too soon. There was no mistaking her. There was no coincidence big enough to explain this away. She turned back to the front page, to the child's information, to the name that had been changed somewhere along the way, buried under new paperwork, new records, a new identity built to make a little girl disappear from every system that might have come looking for her. Sarah Whitfield. The girl the file called Sarah Whitfield had been renamed at some point in the years that followed. Claire didn't need the county records to tell her what name she went by now. She already knew it, because she had heard it 3 days ago in a case briefing. A girl found wandering barefoot on a rural road with a broken padlock still hanging from her wrist. Lily. Claire sat frozen in her chair, the photograph shaking in her hand, the folder open in front of her, like a wound that had finally been allowed to bleed after being stitched shut for over a year. The lie she had believed, the lie that had let her sleep at night, the lie that had told her the girl was safe somewhere far away with a family who loved her, had a name now. Daryl Combs. The clubhouse lot was quiet when Claire pulled in, just past 4 in the afternoon, the sun hanging low and orange over the gravel. She sat in her car for a long moment, the folder on the passenger seat like it might burn a hole through the fabric if she looked at it too long. Her hand still hadn't stopped shaking. She found Tank in the garage bay behind the clubhouse, elbow deep in the engine of an old pickup, a rag hanging from his back pocket. He looked up when her shadow crossed the doorway, and something in his face shifted when he saw her expression. Claire. He set down his wrench. You look like you've seen a ghost. Can we talk somewhere private? He wiped his hands on the rag, studying her for a second longer than felt comfortable, then nodded toward the small office off the side of the garage. It was cluttered with invoices, and a calendar still turned to last month, a space heater humming in the corner even though it wasn't cold. He shut the door behind them. Is it Lily? Did something happen? No, she's fine. She's still with the sitter. Claire's voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. She sat down in the folding chair across from his desk without being asked, and set the folder in front of her like it was something fragile. Tank, I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen before you say anything. He crossed his arms and leaned against the desk. Waiting, he had the patience of a man who'd learned long ago that bad news came faster when you didn't rush it. A year ago, my sister died in a car accident, Claire started, and her voice cracked on the word sister like she hadn't said it out loud in a long time. She had a daughter, 6 years old. I tried to get custody. I filed everything I could as fast as I could, but I was grieving and drowning, and the system moves slow even when you're begging it not to. She opened the folder. They told me the girl had already been adopted out of state. Closed case. I believed them. I had to believe them, because the alternative was that I'd failed her. Tank didn't say anything. His jaw had gone tight. Claire pulled out the photograph and slid it across the desk toward him. "This is my sister. Rachel." Tank looked down at it. A young woman with a crooked smile and a small scar over her eyebrow stared back at him from a faded caseworker's photo. "I found this in Combs's old files today," Claire said. "Buried at the bottom of a box that should have been closed out years ago. The intake report. My sister's death. The aunt who tried and failed to get custody." Her voice shook. "That was me. Tank, I was the aunt. Combs falsified the adoption paperwork. There was no adoption. There was never anyone in another state." She swallowed hard. "The child in that file was renamed at some point after intake. Her name was changed to hide her." Tank's eyes came up slowly from the photograph. "Her name is Lily," Claire whispered. "She's my niece." The garage outside had gone silent. Or maybe it was just that Tank couldn't hear anything past the sound of his own heart slamming against his ribs. He looked at the photo again, at that woman's eyes. The same eyes he'd been looking into every night for weeks now, over a bowl of macaroni and cheese. The same eyes that had finally learned to look at him without fear. "You're her family," he said, and the words came out rough, like gravel dragged over pavement. "Her real family. Blood, Tank, I don't know what this means yet. I haven't even told my supervisor. I just needed you to hear it from me before anything else happened. You have every right to pursue custody." He said it fast, like if he didn't say it fast, he might not say it at all. He turned away from her, busying his hands with a stack of papers that didn't need straightening, his back to her so she wouldn't see his face. "She's your blood. Your sister's girl. That's not nothing, Claire, that's everything. Court's gonna see that clear as day, and they oughta. Tank, you don't need my permission." His voice caught on the last word, splitting right down the middle of it, and he had to stop and press his palm flat against the desk to steady himself. "You go on and do what's right for her. That's all that matters here. That's all that ever mattered." He kept his back to her, staring hard at the wall, at nothing, blinking fast against the burn behind his eyes. Tank found Lily out back, sitting cross-legged on the gravel next to Bones, who was showing her how to whittle a small piece of pine into something that was starting to look like a bird. Wood shavings curled around her knees. Her tongue poked out the side of her mouth in concentration, the same way it always did when she focused hard on something. She looked up when she heard his boots on the gravel, and her whole face changed the way it always did now, from careful watchfulness to something soft and open. That was new. That was his. He'd helped build that. "Hey, Bug," he said, using the nickname that had stuck some time in the last few weeks. Nobody quite remembered when. "You mind if I steal you for a minute?" Bones caught his eye and nodded, setting down his own knife without a word, giving them space the way the brothers always did now when something needed quiet. Tank sat down on the old wooden bench near the fence, and Lily climbed up next to him, tucking her feet underneath her, still holding the half-carved bird in one hand like she wasn't ready to let it go. He didn't know how to start. He'd practiced the words in his head on the walk over, and every version of them sounded wrong now that she was looking at him with those eyes. "Lily, I gotta tell you something," he said finally. "Something good, I think. Something important." Her small body went still beside him. He felt it happen, the way her shoulders drew in, just slightly, the old instinct that still lived under her skin even after everything. He hated that instinct. He hated everything that had put it there. "It's not bad," he said quickly, gentler now. "I promise you that. Nobody's in trouble. Nothing's wrong." She relaxed, but only a little. She waited. "You remember Miss Claire? The lady who's been helping with your case?" Lily nodded slowly. Well, he rubbed the back of his neck, searching for the simplest words he could find. "Turns out, Miss Claire, she's your family bug. Your real family. Your mama's sister. Your aunt." For a moment, Lily just stared at him, like the words hadn't landed yet, like she was waiting for the rest of the sentence, the part where something got taken away. "My aunt," she repeated quietly. "That's right. She's been looking for you a long time. Longer than you know. She didn't know where you were. Nobody told her the truth." He watched her face carefully, every small twitch of it, terrified of what he might see there. "She wants to meet you. Properly. Spend some time with you, if that's okay." Lily's fingers tightened around the little wooden bird until her knuckles went pale. "Do I have to go with her?" Her voice came out small, thin as paper. "Nobody's making you do anything you don't want to do," Tank said. "Not today, not ever, if I got any say in it." But her chin was already trembling, and before he could say anything else, she'd scooted across the bench and pressed herself into his side, small fists grabbing 2 handfuls of his leather vest like she meant to hold on with everything she had. "I don't want to leave," she said, the words coming out broken, half swallowed by a sob. "I don't want to leave you, or Bones, or Chief, or Pastor Ray, or anybody. This is my home now. You said this was my home." Tank's throat closed up so tight he could barely breathe around it. He wrapped his arm around her, felt her shaking against his ribs, felt the wet warmth of her tears soaking into his shirt. Hey now. Look at me." He waited until she tilted her face up, eyes red and swimming. "You listen to me, Lily Malone." He'd started calling her that in his head weeks ago, hadn't meant to say it out loud, but it slipped out now and neither of them corrected it. "I am gonna do everything in my power, everything I got, to make sure you never lose this place. Never lose these people. You hear me? Even if that means I gotta step back and let somebody else stand where I'm standing. Even if it costs me something. You are not losing your home. Not while I got breath in me." That evening, after Lily had cried herself into an exhausted sleep in the room the club had fixed up for her, Tank sat alone in the clubhouse kitchen with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. The lights were low. Somebody had left the radio on low in the other room, some old country song playing to nobody. He stared at the wood grain of the table like it might tell him what to do. He heard boots on the floor before he saw who they belonged to. Bones came first, then Chief, then Pastor Ray, then 3 or 4 more of the brothers, filing in quiet like they'd planned it, though Tonk knew they hadn't. They just knew. They always knew when one of their own was drowning. Bones pulled out a chair across from him and sat down backward on it, arms folded over the top. "She asleep?" Finally, Tank rubbed his eyes. Took a long time. Chief leaned against the counter, arms crossed over his broad chest. You gonna fight it? Tank didn't answer right away. He turned the coffee cup slowly on the table, watching the ring of liquid inside tilt back and forth. I don't know, he said finally. Margaret says I got a case. Says the judge might side with me, given everything, given how far Lily's come here. Says biology don't automatically win. But, Pastor Ray said gently, because there was clearly a but hanging in the air. Tank looked up at him. But that woman is her blood. Her mother's sister. She's been looking for that little girl for over a year, thinking she'd lost her forever, and come to find out the whole time somebody lied to her, kept her from ever knowing where Lily was. He shook his head. How do I stand up in a courtroom and tell a judge that don't matter? How do I look at Claire Whitfield and tell her she don't get to have her niece back, just so I can keep something I got no real right to? You got every right, Bones said, voice low and rough. You're the one who stopped on that road. You're the one who didn't look away. Don't matter. Tank's voice cracked, just slightly, just enough that the room went still around it. None of that gives me the right to take a kid away from her own family, not if that family's good, not if that family can give her something I never can, a name, blood, a real last name that matches her own history. Chief pushed off from the counter and came to sit down heavy in the chair beside him. Tank, look at me. Tank did, reluctant, eyes red at the rims. You've spent your whole life thinking you gotta win to matter. Thinking if you don't come out on top, it means you lost, means you weren't enough. He shook his head slow. This ain't that. This was never about winning a fight for that little girl. It's about doing right by her. Sometimes doing right by somebody means letting go of what you want so they can have what they need. And what if what she needs is right here? Tank's voice broke fully now, no hiding it in front of these men who'd seen him at his worst and never once flinched. What if I fight for her, and I win, and it's the right thing, and I just don't know it, because I'm too scared to try? Pastor Ray put a hand on his shoulder, steady and warm. Or what if you don't have to choose at all, brother? What if this ain't a war you gotta win? What if it's a bridge you gotta build instead? The room went quiet. Somewhere down the hall, the old floorboards creaked with the settling of the house, familiar as breathing now. Tank sat with that a long moment, turning it over in his mind the way he'd turn over an engine part he couldn't quite place, looking for where it fit. You mean don't fight her, he said slowly. Bring her in instead. Woman came here looking for family, Bones said. Maybe she don't know yet she already found one. Tank looked around the table at all of them, these rough, scarred, gentle men who'd carried him through more than he could ever repay, and felt something in his chest loosen just slightly, like a wrench finally turning free after fighting rust for too long. All right, he said, quiet but certain now. All right, I'll call her. Ask her to come back out here. Not to fight, just to talk. Claire's car pulled into the gravel lot a little after 9 in the morning, the tires crunching slow, like even the car wasn't sure it should be there. Tank was waiting on the porch steps, coffee in hand when she stepped out. She looked different from the last time he'd seen her, in that cold county office with the fluorescent lights. Softer somehow, even in her pressed blouse and clipboard tucked under her arm. Thanks for coming, Tank said. You said it wasn't a fight. Claire's eyes were guarded. Careful, I want to believe that. It ain't. Just come sit a spell. Watch, that's all I'm asking. She followed him around back, where the morning sun was already warming the gravel lot. Lily was there, kneeling in the dirt beside Bones, who was showing her how to hold a small carving knife against a chunk of soft pine, his big scarred hands guiding her small ones with a gentleness that looked almost unnatural coming from a man built like a refrigerator. "Careful now," Bones was saying. "Let the wood tell you where it wants to go. Don't force it." Lily's tongue poked out the corner of her mouth in concentration. A curl of wood peeled away under the blade. She grinned, quick and bright, and held it up. "Look, I made a dog." "That is absolutely a dog," Bones said solemnly, though it looked more like a lump with ears. Lily laughed, a real laugh, easy and unafraid, and the sound of it hit Claire like a physical thing. Her hand went to her mouth. They spent the morning like that. Claire sat on an overturned crate near the fence, mostly quiet, her clipboard forgotten in her lap, and watched. She watched Chief let Lily help him check the oil on his bike, watched her get a smudge of grease on her nose and giggle about it. She watched Pastor Ray sit with her under the oak tree while she flipped through a picture book, his off-key humming drifting over as she leaned into his side. Fully relaxed, fully trusting. At lunch, Tank flipped burgers on an old grill, while half a dozen leather-clad men argued cheerfully over whether Lily liked ketchup or mustard better. And Lily settled the debate by declaring, with great authority, both the men roared with laughter, and Lily beamed like she'd won something important. Claire found herself smiling without meaning to. She caught herself, straightened her spine, tried to remember she was supposed to be observing, assessing, doing her job. But her chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with paperwork. In the afternoon, Tank walked over and sat down on the crate beside her. "She wasn't like this," he said quietly. "First few weeks. Wouldn't talk. Flinched if you moved too fast." "I read the file," Claire said, voice thin. "Files don't tell you what it's like watching a kid come back to life." Tank nodded toward Lily, who was now trying to teach one of the younger prospects a clapping game, dissolving into giggles every time he messed up the pattern. "That right there. That's a kid who feels safe." Took a long time to get her there. Claire's eyes were wet. She didn't try to hide it anymore. "I spent a year," she said, voice cracking, thinking she was gone. "Adopted out, lost to me forever. I used to lie awake wondering if she was happy, if anybody was kind to her." She looked at Tank, and something in her face had cracked wide open. "I came here today ready to take her from all this. I had it all justified in my head. Blood, family, rightful place. And now?" Claire watched Lily fall into a fit of laughter as Bones pretended to trip over his own boots, just to make her smile. She pressed her fingers against her mouth, and it was a long moment before she could speak. "Now I don't want to take her away from this," Claire said, voice breaking fully. "I don't want to take her away from any of it. From you. From them." She turned to face him fully, eyes shining. "I want to be part of it. Whatever this is. Whatever you've built here. I want to be her aunt, but I don't want to erase what she has now to do it." Tank felt something unclench deep in his chest, something he'd been holding so tight for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to let it go. "Then let's build it together," he said. "Both of us. However that looks." Claire nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, and reached out to shake his hand like they were sealing something sacred. The sun hung high and gold over the clubhouse that Saturday, the kind of warm September day that made the gravel lot smell like dust and cut grass. Someone had strung up a banner between two porch posts, hand-painted in crooked letters that read "Congratulations, Lily," the paint still a little smeared where a big, rough hand had clearly done its best with a small paintbrush. Tables made from old doors on sawhorses lined the yard, covered in bowls of potato salad, a cake with pink frosting, and a mountain of burgers that Chief guarded like a sacred duty. Bandana streamers, faded from years of use as do rags, fluttered from the porch rail, the same ones from Lily's very first celebration months ago, brought back out for another one. Lily ran through the crowd of leather vests and sunburned arms like she owned the place, because in every way that mattered, she did. She wore her own vest now, small and new, cut down by Bones's wife from a spare piece of leather she'd had lying around. Stitched onto the back, careful and a little crooked, was a small angel patch. The same design as the one on Tank's vest, the one that had first calmed her on that dark road all those months ago. "You see this?" she said to anyone who would listen, spinning in a circle so the vest flared out. "I got my own patch. Bones's wife made it. It matches Uncle Tank's. Looks good on you, kid," Pastor Ray said, tipping his lemonade toward her like a toast. Claire stood near the food table, laughing at something Margaret Ellis had said. A real laugh that came easy now. Nothing careful about it. She'd traded her pressed blouses for jeans most weekends these days. The clipboard had stayed in the car. The guardianship papers had been signed 2 weeks earlier, finalized in a courtroom that had felt nothing like the cold place Tank remembered from his own childhood. Judge Hensley had looked over her glasses at the strange assembly of people in front of her, a biker in his best collared shirt, a social worker turned aunt, a stack of character letters from half the town, and she had simply nodded and said, "Well, I've seen worse arrangements built on far less love." Then she'd signed, and that had been that. Now Lily belonged to both of them, and to all of them, really. Weekdays with Claire in her tidy little house in town, weekends at the clubhouse with Tank and the brothers, holidays split easy between the two like it was the most natural thing in the world. Nobody in town raised an eyebrow about it anymore. Not after they'd watched Lily grow pink-cheeked and bright-eyed over the months. Not after they'd seen how the whole rough crew of them lit up whenever she came around. After the cake had been cut and the paper plates cleared away, Tank wheeled a bicycle out from behind the shop. It was small, painted red, with streamers on the handlebars that Lily had picked out herself from the hardware store the week before. Training wheels had been left off entirely, at Tank's insistence. "She don't need them," he'd told Claire. "She's stronger than she thinks." Lily's eyes went wide when she saw it. "Is that mine?" "All yours," Tank said. "Come on, let's see what you got." The whole club gathered at the edge of the gravel lot, forming a loose half-circle, drinks in hand, grins on their weathered faces. Claire stood at the front, hands pressed together like she was praying, though she was really just holding her breath. Tank held the seat steady while Lily climbed on, her small hands gripping the handlebars tight, her sneakers barely reaching the pedals. "Don't let go," she said. "Not till you're ready," Tank said, "and you tell me when that is." They started slow, Tank jogging alongside, one hand on the seat, the wobbling front wheel cutting shaky lines through the gravel dust. Lily's face was a mix of terror and pure joy, the kind only a kid can wear at the same time. "I got you," Tank kept saying. "I got you." And somewhere in the middle of that gravel lot, surrounded by the only family that had ever truly shown up for her, at 3 a.m, or any hour since, Tank quietly let go. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.